Okay, I have 2:35. Pardon? Yes. If anybody can't hear me at any point, please let me know. I work at home and my volume level keeps dropping, so I want everybody to hear me. This is Perl 6, changes to my Perl 5 brain.
Wait, this is from the top that was advertised. When I have it is your Perl 5 brain on Perl 6.
Yes, yes. I refactored.
Multi-turtle.
Exactly. Please do grab a copy of the slides. Okay, I am Bruce Gray, UTIL online, UTIL, and I am a member of Matt Trout's Hallway ++ group, which means that I'm generally always interruptible. I'm talking to somebody else, just step into the conversation. We want to be hospitable. The hallway track is the most important track at these conferences. I want all your questions about the stuff that I'm going to cover here, either here or in the hallway or an email, but I am going to hold till the end of the talk for questions. I do a lot of work on Perl 6 on RosettaCode, and in the last 6 months I've been active on Code Fights Arcade in Perl 5 mode, really to prep for this talk. I've written a Perl 5 to Perl 6 translator called Blue Tiger. Dr. Four has also written one. Jeff, are you here?
No, Jeff not here this year.
Okay. Well, they're both real good. And most importantly to this talk, for maybe 2 years, at least once a week, I have written at least something in Perl 5 and at least something in Perl 6. And I've noticed that the Perl 6 work has affected my Perl 5 thinking, and I thought you might be interested in how it affects me and possibly how it might affect you. And I'll cover a little bit of the Perl 6 stuff just to whet your appetite. First, the little things. We'll get out of the way quickly. I am addicted to say, which is built into Perl 6. I cringe when I see a trailing new line symbol in a string now. So now in Perl 5, this is my standard prologue, or if I'm in an environment that supports it, modern Perl. If you say use 5.010, you will get say and a couple of other great things. QW, I used to strongly advocate that the proper form of quote words is QW, open paren, whatever, close paren. And unfortunately, in Perl 6, there is magic involved. If you're using parenthesis with something immediately to the left, it means a function call. It always means a function call. It will try and call whatever function is named QW. So it's the worst possible choice in Perl 6. And in Perl 6, you use quote words a lot more. And they have a shortcut for it in Perl 6 that's just angle brackets. So I have started using QW angle brackets as I do there. Floor and ceiling are both numeric methods. They're built into Perl 6, and I have the bad habit of sort of writing the little math on the fly, and I broke that. So I always use POSIX whenever I need seal or floor. If I was not already sold on Moose, Perl 6 would have sealed the deal. They're very similar object models. Everybody who's doing OO in Perl 5 should be using Moose. The top line are the 3 coercion operators in Perl 6 that coerces to Boolean, to numeric, and to string. We don't have those operators in Perl 5, but we have equivalent idioms, which is bang bang, which if you haven't seen it, you just think about it for a second, not will force anything on this side to be Boolean context. It has to. And it will have the same truth value. 0 plus will force numeric, and concatenating to an empty string will force string. More on that later. So those are the trivial changes. Perl 6 has a method called .end. On arrays, you say whatever array .end, it will give you the index of the last element of the array, what you would expect. So in Perl 6, I could do this, go from 0 to whatever the endpoint is, looping over the customer's array. In Perl 5, the equivalent to .end is $octothorpe, which I don't know anymore to say hashtag. Well, hash means something in Perl, you know. Anyway, the pound sign, no, now we got Europeans involved. The pound means something. Anyway, octothorpe, $octothorpe. That is how you say the last element number of customers. That is the syntax for that. I told you I was active on code fights. In the arcade, I've looked at pretty much every Perl solution to every Perl problem that I have solved, which is closer to 200 now. And I can tell you that I am the only person on code fights that uses that syntax, even though that's exactly what it's for. Everybody else, they do that, which gives you the right answer, but it is conceptually wrong. The number of elements in the array minus 1. And if you get into Perl 6, when we have shaped arrays that don't necessarily have to have the same start point, end point, that's going to throw you. And it's just wrong, even though it works and it's right. So it bugs me. And in Perl 6, we have this thing, I call it cat ears, where you can put the arrows on either side of a range operator, and it means omit the range point. And I'm very spoiled by this in Perl 6. I miss it in Perl 5, and it makes me even more sensitive to this issue of number of elements minus 1. So for example, in Perl 6, I could do this, and it would give me B through Y. Now I could just put B and Y up there as the constants, but that's not relevant to what I'm trying to solve there. I don't want B through Y. I want the whole alphabet minus the endpoints. That's what this says. If I said B dot dot Y, I'd be invoking magic constants that aren't actually relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish. They just coincidentally coincide. Maybe that's nitpicking, but when you actually start using it and you can say what you mean versus what you almost mean, it really feels different. So also in Perl 6, if I wasn't going from A to Z minus the endpoints, if I was going from covering a whole array except for the endpoints, I'd go from 0 to end minus the endpoints. That's what the cat ears do. And in Perl 5, if I wanted to do the same thing, I would write it this way, from 0 plus 1 to the end of the array minus 1. If you don't know the $octothorpe syntax, like everybody on code fights, you end up writing that, which will make your maintenance programmer hunt you down someday. Why are you subtracting 2? You're not. You're subtracting 1 and 1. And as a side note, that third line, I gave this talk at the Atlanta PerlMongers, and they pushed back hard on that. They said, if I ever saw that in my code base, I would look for what the programmer was smoking. You do not embed 0 plus 1. So I'm taking that under consideration, but I actually would write it as that third line myself. Just who's uncomfortable with that? It's fine.
That's fine. I mean, the compiler's going to turn that into a constant.
Yeah, but we care about the people. We care about the people.
Well, no,
Yeah. Okay, so in that first Perl 6 example, I wouldn't actually write it like that. I wouldn't go from 0 to the endpoint. I would use the new method that we've got, .keys. Okay, just like a key in Perl 5, you have keys on a hash, keys hash name. Well, we have that for arrays in Perl 5. So I would write it like that. Actually, there's an even shorter way. And I wish I could do it in Perl 5. So that's the right way in yellow and the way I don't like in red, but the way I would really love to do it at the end there. Wouldn't that be better? Well, you can actually do that in Perl 5, but it's like, what, 524, 526? Anybody know?
514.
512. 0. 7 years ago. I found this out last month that this works. You don't even have to say, use 5. No, it just works. It's not my fault that I missed it. It was left out of the release delta for 5.12. And it wasn't documented until 10 months later. So I should have known. We all should have known. I mean, everybody reads Perl Delta, right?
It's from 5.6. It's from Perl 6, so it's on the back.
Yeah. So I'm not joking. If you are not using keys when you need array indexes, you should start. This is just a no-brainer. It's better coding.
Is it just pairwise?
No, it's just the keys. It doesn't give you the values. It's just like if you've got 3 elements, it'll be 0, 1, 2, and you have to look up you have to index into the array. If you want to do better than that, you have to see me later. There are reasons to do it and to not do it, which is why I didn't make a slide here. Okay, so $octothorpe, keys, everybody got it? Moving on. Types and Perl 6 design has a lot to do with types and something called arity. From the programmer perspective, types are completely optional and are gradual in Perl 6. So you can choose to use them and you can add them in gradually. From the Perl 6 view of it, like the compiler's view of it, types are pervasive. Everything has a type. If you say $foo equals 42 and you ask what is the type of $foo, it will tell you it's an int. So, simple example. I can write this in Perl 6 with no types. Or I can specify types for some or all of the variables that I declare or in my parameter list. That -- bool is the return type of that subroutine. What I have found is that I most often use it if I'm like translating Java into Perl 6. I don't use it much if I'm not, except at the boundaries. The edges, your entry, your exit, what's essentially your API. That's a great place to have error checking and automatic documentation. It's not just, it'll catch it if you try and pass it 2.5 as the year. Somebody reading the code, it's crystal clear what that's supposed to take and what it's going to return. Catches a lot of errors. Well, back in Perl 5, I found that a lot of those errors, you can, especially the important thing of you are silently ignoring any extra arguments that your subroutine is being given. You can catch a lot of that just by checking the number of arguments. And that'll also catch a lot of times when you're expecting an array ref and you get an array or vice versa. So that die line, that's the way to do it. Just check for how many things are in at underscore. Arity is the computer science word for number of parameters that a subroutine is supposed to get. And you can introspect that in Perl 6. You can ask the subroutine object, what is your arity? That die line is in my fingers now. It's automatic. You can also accommodate multiple parameters, or optional parameters, zero parameters. If you want to do more, if you need to be checking types of things, you're going to have to use something a little heavier. I used to use params validate. I still will on occasion. There are some enhancements and extensions to that. Param util is also very, very popular if you have a shift style of passing parameter or absorbing arguments. And subroutine signatures will not give you the types, but it will let you do the stuff in line. And as far as returning a type, I often coerce the return type, because I can't say dash dash arrow bool in Perl 5, but I can say return bang bang error code, and that keeps me from leaking information. My API says I'm going to return true or false from this function, whether it succeeded or failed. But internally I'm doing that by checking the error code for whether it's zero or not. If I just said return error code, I'm actually leaking information from the internals of my subroutine that people will start relying on. Whenever you leak outside your API, somebody will start using that information improperly, and then when you refactor or rejig your subroutine and you're no longer leaking that information, you will get massive complaints and they'll be very incensed. And it's one of the Murphy's laws. It's guaranteed to happen if you leak out of your API. So I recommend always checking arity and consider using coercion for your return types. I've started doing it. Okay, functional, I'm going to trip up here a little bit. Perl 6 incorporates a lot of ideas from functional style of coding. What I found is I cannot speak well about what functional is. So if you don't know already, you should ask somebody else, or you should look it up in Wikipedia, because when I try and talk about it, it's like, I've known Abigail for years. I tried to introduce Abigail to somebody a couple of years ago, and I was saying things that just weren't true. Abigail was standing there. No. No. You're thinking of Ilya. No, it's a bank. It's like, oh my God. That's really how I am when I'm talking about functional. I really do know the stuff. I really can't talk about it. But like Haskell, that's the best I can do is by example. In Haskell, constants aren't, variables don't. Yeah, that's how I talk about it. Let me just stick to, don't reuse variables. You want to reduce mutability. You want to, the less you can change state, the easier it is to think about coding. And it's easier for the compiler too. And when there are concepts that can be generalized, you create a subroutine that allows you to pass in first the specification of the generalization, like grep. Grep is a general idea. Give me the things that match a certain criteria. The first thing you pass to grep is a code block that tells you what the criteria is. This is a functional concept. Map and grep come out of the functional world. So, in this code example, costs array and markup array are parallel arrays. Okay? Take 30 seconds to try and understand this code, maybe spot a bug. Oh, please. Okay. That's one. That's just the bug. And note that either you saw that bug, or at least you had to read through the line to try and find the bug, or you realize you should have read through the line to find the bug. But let's move past the parameter handling stuff at the beginning there and just focus on the important stuff. What are we returning the max and the min of? It's the maximum of the cost after it's marked up, so we'll call that the price. So the maximum of the prices, the minimum of the costs, the total of the prices, and an array of the prices. And that's not a bug, that's how that's designed. That's what the callers want. Reading the code, you would either think there's a bug there, or it would take you a while to figure out what I just said. Hopefully it's documented. Part of the problem is that cost is being reused after the original value is no longer needed. Now, I came up in C, where you don't waste a perfectly good variable. But this is a wasted opportunity for clarity. If we make price a variable, now cost does not mutate within the loop, and extracting what we want to extract from the loop is much, much easier. So this is what I get after I extract. Max, min, sum are all part of list util. And now you can clearly see that cost and markup are parallel arrays because we're handling them in the same line. And if you look closely, you'll see that that for loop has been reduced to something that we can think of as a map. That's a ton better than the original code. Except some of you might be thinking, but this version is so inefficient. This version passes through the data 4 times, right? The original for loop is so much faster. But, as was famously shouted, but it is faster for the programmer, and it's a lot faster for the maintenance programmer someday to understand. That's the more important perspective. But if you are efficiency conscious, maybe you really have huge amount of data, the shorter version is probably faster because list util is written in excess, and it ships with your version of Perl. So it's already there. There's no excuse to not use that. Even if you're in an environment where you don't use CPAN modules, it comes with Perl. Now, if you think I skipped some steps in my refactoring, I once would have thought the same thing, but it really is the way I think. I did that jump all in one big leap in my head. Here's a quick peek at some of the Perl 6 that shaped that mindset. This is how I would have written that in Perl 6. Okay? Passing in 2 arrays. You can do that in Perl 6. You don't have to pass in array refs. They keep arrays distinct. I check to make sure that they're the same size. I'm using the Z operator to give me 1 from cost, 1 from markup, 2nd from cost, 2nd from markup, 3rd from cost, 3rd from markup. And then by using 2 $caret variables, those are called placeholder variables, inside the map, I automatically turn the map into expecting 2 things at a time. It maps into an array of prices, and that last line is the same, except I don't have to return with a backslash on prices. I can just return the array. It will keep it intact. Well, I wouldn't really write it like that. I'd use the method forms of max, min, sum. Well, the z, you can put an operator with the z, so I just do that, really. Well, if I use hyper with the arrows pointing inward, that guarantees that the sizes of the two things on either side will be the same, and it'll yell at me if it's not, so I can take away the die if they're not the same size. That's how I'd write it. But that's another show. That's my summary of functional programming so far, as it applies to Perl 5 and this talk. But not done. New code example. This subroutine takes no parameters. This is Perl 5. It scans the global customer array to try and find out, are any of them profitable? Now, let's focus on the important parts. We've got a flag variable called found. We loop through, we set it to true if we find what we're looking for, and then we return the state of found. And it always goes through every customer. That's not efficient. What if the very first customer was profitable? I mean, if I was going to do it that way, I might as well write it like that. That first version is just a long form of grep. So I might as well write it as grep. Now the bang bang, well, I already covered that, remember? You might not know that in scalar context, grep doesn't return all the things it found. It returns the count of the things it found. So I'm looking for, did it return 0 or did it return more than 0? Since we're in a subroutine, whoops. Okay, so we can do better than that. We can have an early return. So if we found what we're looking for, we will not only set the flag, we will hit last and jump out of the loop. Much more efficient, a little more code. Since this is in a subroutine, we can actually refactor it with return. Not much better efficiency, but certainly more concise. But both those forms, I watch for those now all the time. That last form and the early return form, they're both just the long form, like we had a long form of grep before. These are the long form of first. First is a functional concept. And in Perl 5, it is also part of listutil. You have it on with your Perl. And like grep or map, you give it a code block of what you're looking for. I guess like grep, give it a code block of what you're looking for. And it will return the first one that it found. Now, I have the habit of putting defined in front of it because sometimes I'm not looking through customers, sometimes I'm looking through numbers. And if that number was 0, then even though it found it, it would return the 0. So if it doesn't find anything, it gives undef, and I'm checking whether or not it was defined. So when I say defined first, that means did it find it or not? Did it find it anywhere or not? It's just a habit, but I think it's a good one. In case you're thinking this is esoteric, in the first 180 of my code fight solutions, I used first 30 times. So 1/6 of the time. That's enough for me to put it on y'all's radar. I'm using it more and more in day-to-day programming. I've known about it in Perl 6 for a long time, but I only recently found out that it was so easy to get to in Perl 5. And this is the Perl 6 version with all the syntax shortcuts to to throw you. Take nothing, go through the customers, look for the first, and that's a shortcut to making a code block. If you put a star in particular places, it means make this a code block around me, and turn the star into essentially a $_. And the question mark forces Boolean context. So that's the last of first. Questions?
Statements? There's also reduce that's in that same list util that is the generalized form of map and, or of grep and first, not map. That will let
Yes.
you do a similar thing.
Is that my 15-minute mark?
No, it's not.
You have a question?
Similar, I was going to suggest, what about any?
Okay, hold on. For the people at home, the first comment was reduce is in list util, and it's the generalized, well, it's a more abstract thing that can be used to implement a number of things, including sum and min and max, and to the functional people, they're all the same thing under the hood. And Perl 6 does that a little bit too. There's a generalized reduce operator where you can just put a square brackets with an operator in it, and it becomes a reduction operator. But we also have reduce as a function, as a subroutine in both. You're saying about any and all? What, do you want to say anything particular about them besides highlighting them?
Well, defined first strikes me as the same thing as just using any.
That's a really good point. He says, defined first strikes me as the same thing as using any. And yes, I use any and all a good bit in Perl 6. I have not adopted the habits of using them in Perl 5, partly because the version of list util that is on Code Fights does not have them. And I didn't mention them here because I think of them as a little more advanced, but you are completely right. They should be equivalent, and in Perl 6 you would probably say that instead.
But does any short circuit?
Does any short circuit? Yes. Well, in Perl 6, I don't know about Perl 5. I don't know why you would write it otherwise in Perl 5.
Well, because the one that's in quantum superposition does not.
Because the one in quantum superpositions does not.
That's the original version of any.
That's the original version of any.
So I think the one in list more utils does. I don't know the one that's in list util, because I didn't know it was even in list util. I remember being in list more util.
I don't know.
Yeah. There are numerous cousins, which unfortunately are all over the place. List some util, list more util, list most util, list all utils. And they're worth looking at just so you know what you should not be reinventing the wheel on. But I work in environments that are kind of all over the place, and I can't always rely on being able to use the various stuff. But there's great stuff there. You really should see it for yourself. What else? Yes, sir.
Just continuing this along the same lines, you were upset before about someone who says at array -1 instead of dollar array, because it's not really what you mean.
Yes.
So I think you're not really interested in which is the first one. You want to know if it's any one. So I think conceptually speaking, any is better than first.
I missed something in the last three words on either yours or a comment.
No, I said conceptually speaking, any is what you mean.
Yes.
First. You
And
don't
then
care if it's the first one, the second one, or you just want to know if there's one or not.
I understand now. What was the joke?
No, he's got you there. Yeah. It was, he said, he's got you there.
Yes, absolutely. So for the camera, he's making the comparison of, I made reference to the $octathorpe, it's what you mean versus what is true but isn't you're not actually saying what you mean, which is so valuable in Perl 6 to me, and comparing that to defined first versus any. And that's completely right. And that's the best argument, unless there was something terrible performance-wise with any, which there may have been early on with the early version of junctures. I can't remember. Junctions, sorry, not junctures. What is that? Early version of junctions. But okay. But yes, that's absolutely right. For those of you who haven't seen it, and I apologize, I would normally do this on a laptop. The graphics are shorted out on it, so I can't freely type to show you. But you can say, if in Perl 6, if foo equals 5 vertical bar 6, that's a juncture. I'm going to keep doing that. A junction, meaning the same thing as if foo equals 5 or foo equals 6. So it's a miniature version of any. But it certainly makes for tight, easy-to-read code. I mean, once you know what the vertical bar means. What else? Give me stuff about Perl 6 in general, or Perl 5. Would I still be running Perl 5 if I weren't being paid for it? Yes, for performance reasons. Yeah, I cut this from my opening, but in case it is helpful to you, I'm a contract programmer, and I do not deliver Perl 6 code to clients. There are several issues. The biggest one is bus factor. If I deliver something tomorrow and I get hit by a bus the next day, I cannot know that my client can find another Perl 6 programmer. The nearest one is Tom. He's 4 hours away, and he's retired. So there is that. But I do write for clients in Perl 6 either the easy stuff or the complicated stuff. The stuff in the middle, it's Perl 5. And when I'm done, I translate it back into Perl 5 and deliver it to the client. Now, what does done mean? Done means I've completely finished the algorithm or the code that I'm working on, or I need something that's in Perl 5 that I don't have in Perl 6, which is less every day, or I need to be running across a large data set, and I was using a restricted subset to make Perl 6 run fast enough, and I need to be running on all the data now, so it's time to switch to Perl 5. That happens often. But the reason why I do this, why it's fair to my business partners, my clients, is because Perl 6 is faster to write in. Perl 6 is easier to think in. It's a better language. What would you expect? I had lunch with the authors of Python in a Nutshell at OzCon. Well, it was the Python table, so it was everybody there, but they were the ones who were mostly engaging me. And I was picking their brains on their 2 to 3 and 3 to 2, Python 2, Python 3 translation tools, and backwards too, and their general issues that their community has had with having 2 different versions of Python. And they were very helpful in talking about that. And I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah. Yes, and their statement in the middle of something was, he was giving me an example. Thank you all for reminding me where I was. He gave me an example of some code that was in Python 2 that will never be translated because it was so heavily optimized for the idiosyncrasies of Python 2. And everything else they want to write in Python 3. They said, because it's a better language. That was a bald-faced statement by community experts that made me see that this is not not a unique perspective. I know that we talk about Perl 5 and Perl 6 as sister languages, and they are, and Perl 5 is never going away. The code base is too enormous. But if you get to choose, Perl 6 is better to work in. Modulo, you know, some modules and some performance and the things that we're all working to make better. Just the bare language, it's better to work in. What else? I've been given a 10-minute warning. Yes, sir.
Perl 6 truly influenced the new developments in Perl 5. The Perl 5 has its own development stream. Are some of the developments of Perl 5 and Perl 6 sort of forthcoming influencing Perl 6 at all?
So the question is, we all know that we keep backporting ideas, concepts, features from Perl 6 into Perl 5. Perl 5 has its own stream of developments. Is anything making it from Perl 5 to Perl 6? I'm not aware of them, but there are people in the audience who would know better than me, so can anybody respond to that? Even to say, no, there definitely aren't any. Larry Wall is giving me a shrug. I really can't think of any.
Maybe some of the object initializations and stuff. We define build differently than Moose does. And Perl 6 ended up with a tweak thing that does more or less what Perl 5's build was. So that's one example.
Okay. Larry Wall is telling us that there is something in the object initialization world that Moose's build does better than Perl 6's build. We've had to add the tweak submethod in Perl 6 to catch up, so to speak, to get the right functionality there. And I only found out about tweak a couple of days ago, so I can't speak to that, but I'm glad to know that it is working both ways, and that we haven't got everything right, but when we declared 6.c, we're committed to that, and yeah, we can't fix things after that point, but if we can't fix them, we will find a way. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
You say that Perl 5 is faster executing than Perl 6. Perl 6 has certainly sped up in the past year and a half. Will it ever match up?
The question is, Perl 6 is getting ever faster. Will it ever catch up to Perl 5? Well, let me branch that. In some ways, it already is faster than Perl 5. If you are putting so many modules, like you're using Moose and you're using all the things that you would need to make Perl 5 do the things that Perl 6 does, I think some of the benchmarks show that we're already beating them. But that, that's sort of a cop-out. But it's an interesting point that the part of the reason Perl 5 is so fast is it's not doing as much as Perl 6 is. But to your actual question, I don't see why not. The things that, there are a lot of places where Perl 6 as a design can be, conceptually, there are places where it can be better. If you say my int foo equals 42, then the compiler can know from there on, you're not going to put a string into foo. It's going to be an int from then on, although it is mutable. And it should be able to optimize around that, especially when you're declaring classes. This is of a certain class. We should be able to do a faster dispatching. And there are just tons of things like that. But that doesn't mean that they are right now. Also, there's a whole lot that has been done and is being done with parallelization and asynchrony. that have enormous potential, but right now are not like, if I talked about the hyper operator. Hyper, among other things, thank you, sir, means like hyper multiply. You've got an array on either side. It can multiply them in any order it wants to, and it can create threads. The compiler can create threads and do them all in parallel. That's part of what hyper means is, I promise you, compiler, that if you don't do this in order, it's not going to screw me up. Lots of potential there. Right now, does it do it? Does it do it right now?
I think there's an experimental.
Okay. Maybe an experimental branch. I know one of the funny things, I think, is whenever there's something like that where we say, this feature means it can happen out of order, if it's not being run on parallel threads, we deliberately have an algorithm where we make sure it runs in a single thread, a single processor, out of order, so that one day when you've been developing on a single processor machine and you take it to a multiple processor machine, you won't get bitten by bugs the way you do in, what, every other language right now? It's great piece of twistedness. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
We're past 5 minutes. Anything else? Thank you.